Hello and welcome back to Azure Terraformer. Today is a continuation of a mailbag episode, answering Kapil's question about DR, prod, Terraform State, and how it all should come together. And last episode, I spent a lot of time talking about the DR environment and the deployment strategy and the Terraform code structure itself. But I feel like I didn't do justice to the Terraform State question and making sure Terraform's, because I think Kapil was asking something related to having two separate state files in different regions, and that got me thinking about different state storage and backup strategies, as well as access control strategies for different tiers of environments. You've got dev environments, you've got prod environments, you have DR environments, and you have single subscription environments, you have multi-subscription environments. So I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe what the most basic way of setting up a Terraform State backend in Azure, and then elaborate and iterate on that to see what other methods and techniques you can use to organize your Terraform State. So without further ado, the most basic form of Terraform State on Azure, right, is you have a storage account. Inside that storage account, you of course have a container, and then you have different state files inside that container. So I'm not going to delve into container structure. Of course, you can also slice and dice where you store the state files in the storage account. If you recall, our Terraform backend consists of the storage account name, the container, and then the resource group. And of course, the resource group contains the storage account. So now this resource group is tied to a region, and as is the storage account. So we have a single region, we have a single storage account, we've got a single container, and then inside that container we're going to drop a bunch of files. And let's say we have an application, we'll call it App 1, and App 1 has several environments. And each of these environments are going to have a backend key, which is going to be a concatenation of the application name and the environment name. So we're going to have A1, it's great sauce, A1 dev. And so as we run Terraform apply, we are going to generate these state files, and these state files are going to make their way onto this container. And this picture is essentially the most basic Terraform backend that you could imagine. What are some characteristics of this? One, we have a single subscription. We have a single region, and we have single access control. Basically, if you have access to Terraform State, the storage account that controls the Terraform State for the dev environment, you also have access to the Terraform State for prod. And so this can be an unacceptable muddling of access control boundaries between environments. I know in DevOps we talk about like from source to prod. That doesn't necessarily mean your developers have access to prod all the time. So when I talk about access control boundaries, I'm not like trying to go back to the 90s where we had these silos of the ops team and the dev team, and where we pitched a bundle of DLLs over the wall and prayed that the ops team had a fun day with it. That's not what I'm talking about. I think these access control boundaries are actually important. No matter who is going to be manipulating that environment, even if it's the dev team themselves. So we loot with a single subscription. That's the subscription in Azure is in and of itself an access control boundary. The resource group and storage account are both access control boundaries. And then what else are we losing? Well, the region, we have a resiliency issue. What happens if we have a regional impact? we saw yesterday that dev and prod are in different regions. So DR and prod are in different regions. Let's say DR is in East US, and then prod is in West US. And we know that our storage account for our Terraform State is in West US. Well, what happens when there's an outage affecting the region? Let's say there's a catastrophic failure in US West. What happens to DR? How do we spin up our DR environment? Well, Terraform State is trapped in US West, so it could be suffering the same fate as our prod environment due to that catastrophic outage in US West. So this approach has some serious limitations. Now, before we move on, I also want to call something out. In addition to the storage of the Terraform State in this backend and the method that we use that, there's also a technique using Terraform Workspaces, where Terraform Workspaces can make it easy to switch between different state files. And to see how this works, and this is a technique that I use as well, Terraform Workspace select is a command. Of course, you have to do workspace new to create the workspace, but when you do workspace select, you specify an environment name, and that's basically kind of forking a TF state file for each workspace. And so we would name our workspaces after the environments that we want to maintain Terraform State for. So we'd have a workspace for dev, we'd have a workspace for prod, and we'd have a workspace for DR. And this workspace select command would basically inform the naming convention of the file in our backend. You don't have to use workspaces within Terraform. I do, just because I find it a useful way to organize the state files. But as we move on and use more sophisticated storage mechanisms for our state, where we create smaller, tighter blast radiuses, you'll see how this workspace kind of feature of Terraform loses its luster, in that the ability to switch back and forth between workspaces kind of uses its utility when your back end that you've just done Terraform init on literally is designed for one workspace only, for that specific environment, dev or prod, right? Or DR, right? So just wanted to throw that out there, but in very simple scenarios, I think workspaces is fun way to organize the state files within a single storage repository. But it's not going to really help you out a lot when you move on to more sophisticated storage techniques. So now, what's another way? What's another way that we can use to store Terraform state? So again, we have our application, we have a dev environment, and we have our developers. And let's say we want to create control boundaries between our developers and our production environments. With this, we can create a separate resource group and a separate storage account to store different life-cycled environments. So in this case, I'm going to create my resource group with my storage account in it. And my Terraform state file, TF state for dev, is just going to be stored into its own resource group for dev. And we can, and then this resource group, we'll pick the region that we want it to go into. And then basically anytime you deploy updates to the dev environment, its state is going to be stored in a resource group dev, in a dev region. We could take this even further and wrap this into, as I've shown in a previous episode, we've got a subscription that is our dev subscription. And so now, not only are we changing the backend, where the backend is located, but we also have to change the authentication for Terraform itself. Because if you recall, Terraform uses 4 parameters. So these 4 things change all of a sudden when you want to branch your Terraform state across subscriptions. The backend is going to be using these 3 values in order to triangulate to the resource group and the storage account and the container that's stored within our subscription. So now if we go and take this forward, then application 1 has, of course, a prod environment, and we can do the same thing. We set up a sub, we set up a resource group in prod, we set up a storage account in prod, and then when we create our state file, we store that into that backend for prod. This creates a clean separation between the security boundaries between dev and prod. Now, this doesn't solve our resiliency problems with DR, does it? Because we have DR over here. Now with DR, we can also set up another subscription. Now again, subscriptions don't cost you money. They're really just a boundary to organize your access control for your environments. So don't feel like I'm trying to sell you something when I start adding all these subscriptions. And just like prod, our DR environment will have its own TF state file that gets stored into its own subscription. But this time, when we set up the resource group for and the storage account for DR, we're going to put it into the region that DR is going to be in. And so using this technique, we create a blast radius between our environments, both from a resiliency standpoint and availability standpoint, and a security standpoint from an access control. We have very clean access control boundaries for our users, but also with this Terraform authentication piece, we're going to want to make sure that we have a service principal that is going to be running the Terraform. So in Azure AD, we're going to want to have a service principal for dev, prod, and DR. And those service principals are going to be responsible for running the Terraform apply command in those respective environments. And so each pipeline that we execute is going to have a different client ID and a different client secret that corresponds to the respective service principal that we're going to be using for that environment. And of course, depending on your security profile, you could probably use the same service principal for prod and DR, like if it really doesn't matter. But yeah, that's up to you. I think if you go to this point and you have separate subscriptions with separate resource groups in the correct location for the environment that you're targeting, you're going to have awesome availability, resiliency across your Terraform state. And guys, this may seem like a lot of stuff, but we're talking about storage accounts here. We're talking about resource group and subscriptions. These things cost $0 essentially. And the state files that get stored into these things cost close to $0 as well. I mean, we're talking about a few hundred kilobytes per state file. So the fact that we have a lot of storage accounts and we have a lot of resource groups shouldn't put you off at all. Lastly, backup. You could set up another storage account somewhere else. Let's say it's in East US. Instead of having like a DR, location where state is deployed to by default, you just set up like an object replication from your production West US storage account into East US. And you could do this as many times as you felt like you needed to make sure that you had the Terraform state and multiple copies of it. such as if there's ever an outage and you want to go to a different region and provision, and access your Terraform state, you'll be able to do that. So that's another technique. Like DR doesn't even necessarily have to have a hot path deployment of its own subscription and its own resource group. You could just set up replication of your Terraform state file, and in this case, DR state file would actually, as an alternate, the state file would go to the prod storage account, but you would use this replication technique to back up your state files to the DR region, and then in the case of an incident, you would just point your Terraform pipeline to the state files that are in that storage account where you're replicating backups of your prod and DR environments to, and then you can manage your prod environment and you can manage your DR environment from that backup storage account. And we can pop out any number of these wherever we want to, just using object replication in blob storage. So so that feels good. I feel like we tackled the Terraform state management issue head on. Again, last episode, I feel like I glossed over it. I hope this was helpful. Like, we dug into this topic in very great depth. Again, remember, the benefits of this approach are better security, higher resiliency, higher availability, and lower impact to a business continuity outage. And so I would highly recommend using this approach for any production scenarios. Again, if you're just fooling around with Terraform, getting started, you don't need to go nuts like this, unless you want to try it like they do at the big boys in production. You can just use a single subscription, single resource group, single storage account, and use Workspaces and deploy your environments. The mechanics will be exactly identical. All you'll do when you go to this model is you'll be using different client ID, different client secret, different subscription ID for dev, prod, and DR. And then you'll be using a different backend, these 3 different backend settings right here. You'll have a different storage account name, of course, a different resource group where the storage account exists, and the container name would probably be the same across all those things. So it's really just changing the variables of those 6 things to use this approach and to target different storage accounts and basically different Azure backends for your Terraform state. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, smash the like button. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. I really like my whiteboard thing, although I had some technical difficulties today with the sync, it becoming out of sync with my Mac. But it's been a lot of fun, dropping onto a whiteboard and drawing some of this out. It's definitely easier to visualize than just looking at the code. So, and it's definitely easier to talk to, as I converse with myself. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. That's it for today. Azure Terraformer signing off.